Good morning, Madam Clerk. Please call the roll.
Alderwoman Davis, I'm sorry. Alderman Moore,
Here.
Alderman Vaccaro, Alderwoman Howard,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderwoman Boyd,
Here.
Alderman Muhammad, Chairman Conway.
Present.
6 present, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll do a couple of housekeeping things. Will you note that Alderman Vaccaro is the vice chairman?
Yes.
That will help. Annually, we're required to do the city's budget, and this will be the start of that process. We will bring in the departments, the major departments. They're already pre-scheduled. I think we have most people lined out to come in, the police department, fire department, building, forestry, the ones that impact our residents directly on a daily basis, and provide some of the key services that our constituents expect. Those people are being scheduled. We should have the complete schedule done hopefully by the end of the week or early next week. If there's a department that you want to see, just let Alderman Vaccaro know. We will get them on the schedule. On the patronage offices, generally I do them about every other year. That if I did you last year, I might do you this year. For all intents and purposes, we don't underwrite much of their departments, so it doesn't impact our general revenue as much. It just impacts our citizens and the services they receive here at City Hall. And your residents don't delineate in their minds that that's a county office versus a city office when they look at that. Next Wednesday night, Alderwoman Howard has undertaken the efforts to have our public hearing. Our evening public hearing that will be at St. Mary Magdalene's School Hall. The overview that Mr. Payne is going to give today, he will do a summary of that next week, and then that is where the residents will just have the floor the whole time. We'll have a list. They'll come in and ask questions. Last year, I think we did that in Greg Carter's ward. On Goodfellow, I can't remember the record.
North side.
Yeah, and so we do at least one here. Obviously, the public is invited to every single meeting we have. Alderman?
I have a question regarding that. I can't remember from last year. Do the citizens have a chance for input?
Yes,
Okay, so they sign in and they get like 5 minutes or whatever there, okay.
right. And then they can either ask questions or they can tell us what their priorities are.
Okay.
We're fairly open as to that. And
But we don't respond.
we
do.
We can,
But, okay.
but if they're angry, I'll respond.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, but I just
that is
wanted to know
Sometimes
that they
that's
will
not
have
true.
input, yeah. Okay.
Alderman, that's at 6:30.
6:30, the 17th of May.
Yeah, at Mary Magdalene
I
on Kings
don't have-
Highway
Yeah,
and
the address is,
Sutherland, Kings Highway.
Well,
Sutherland and Kings Highway.
the address is actually
On, yeah.
4924 Bancroft at South Kings Highway. Enter from the Sutherland side. Okay.
And as we bring in these city departments over the next couple of weeks, just a couple of things, a reminder. We're here to ask questions at this point in time. Who, what, where, when, why, and how is how a question starts. If you have an idea of something that you want to cut or add during this period of time, just throw it out there. Say I'd like to add back or take off. When we get to our last meeting or last two meetings, we will do cuts and additions to the budget. We obviously don't know what those may be today. I know that it's a tighter budget. Mr. Payne will talk about that, but I'm sure you will hear from people in many departments about how tough it is, or they're losing a couple of employees, or save my job, and those types of circumstances. We will analyze everything, and like I said, if there's some department that needs to be brought in, you have to let Mr. Vaccaro know, beyond the major departments. Those are basically the ground rules, and Mr. Paul Payne is here with us. Paul is the budget director. And Mr. Payne, if you would introduce the members of your staff in the room, I think that would be helpful to get us started.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and members of the committee. I have this morning with us Ed Bess, the senior budget analyst, and Jeremy Broadbrooks, who is a junior analyst with me in the budget division. Also joining, depending on which departments are appearing in the day, you'll have Jane Sussman, who handles different departments, and she's upstairs.
All right.
Yeah, maybe I do have handouts for you if you don't have enough documents to look through.
right there.
But these are more summary type.
There you go.
So this should be easier to.
Steve, we're working out of the line item.
Yes.
That's right. I can see there.
I'm sorry.
No, that's right. She had the wrong one.
And just in case, all of these documents are online too on the city
Okay,
website. So both the presentation will be after this meeting and all the budget documents are online.
Just pass that out.
Mr. Payne, go ahead and proceed.
Okay. Starting on the second page of that exhibit, is starting with the, where it's got the summary of the budget entirely. The total proposed budget for FY 2018 is $1,051,000,000. That's an increase of 1% over the previous fiscal year. And the table below that shows you basically how the funds break out, the general fund being the largest portion, or about half of the budget, is $510.5 million. It's actually a decline of 0.1%. But this year, if you may recall, we had something called the 27th pay, where just by the quirk of the calendar, you have 27 paydays. So that happens every 11 years, but it skews the numbers a bit. If you pull that was about $10.1 million. You pull that out, our increase is about 1.9%.
So 2016 was the 27th?
Right. You're going to have three more pays before the end of the fiscal year. So there'll be 27 paychecks in fiscal 2017.
Oh, okay, I wasn't even
Get it?
thinking about it.
Yeah,
I was
okay.
thinking
Yeah.
December,
Now.
okay.
Yeah, no, we're on our fiscal year as opposed to counting, right.
27 paydays.
Yeah, it's not a tax purpose type thing, it's just our fiscal year. In the special revenue categories, the total budget is $133.6 million. That's a 6.2% increase. The largest amount of that increase is the new economic development sales tax that was approved by voters in April. I'm anticipating that to be about $11.2 million. It was, that'll be a partial year. The new tax goes into effect on October. There's about a lag in collections, and so you should probably get about 7 months worth of collections, so that's in the budget. And I should point out that it hasn't been defined that much. It's just got 5 line items, which I'm sure as the budget progresses, there'll be some more definition applied to that. The use
That
tax.
was the Proposition 1 money.
Yes, that's
Okay.
Proposition 1 money, or, yeah, a different, if you want to tell it that way. The use tax is actually down $1.8 million. Aside from the increase in the rate, the underlying use tax was actually declined. I mean, it's not been a growth tax for us. It's sort of, we've struggled with it. Now, I do have a little increase in there related to online sales, which is, but we're going to have to keep an eye on that because that's new. Public safety sales tax is also down, as well as the gaming fund. In the grant funds category, it's $54.2 million. That's down 4.2%. We have some declines in both the block grant as well as some health grants and human services grants. Health is down $1.1 million. Human services are down $1.4 million. There's a slight increase in the police department grants of about $800,000. The debt service fund at $5.8 million, that's a 61.1% increase. That's simply because we issued new debt last year. If you remember, we had the GO debt approved last year, that $25 million issue, and so that's payments on that debt. The capital improvement fund's $39.9 million. That's a decline of 5.7%, or down $2.4 million. That reflects the decline both in this year's sales tax, as well as the use of one-time sources of about $3.9 million from last year. Enterprise funds nearly flat at $226.4 million. The water division is up about $1.9 million, and the airport is down $1.4 million. The internal service funds category, that's a category where departments charge themselves, let's say the mail service fund or our health benefits fund for which benefits get paid out of. That's at $81 million. Most of that increase is related to the employee medical costs. There is a slight increase in, our expected increase in fuel costs for next year. And you can see from the pie chart down below, general fund's about just under half of the budget. On page 3, I put these bar charts in here, sort of an indicator of how revenues are doing in the current fiscal year. In the current fiscal year, FY17, earnings tax revenues are continuing to show growth through the third quarter, actually outperforming. They were up 4.9% through the third quarter. I've seen the first month of April, although I usually don't like to adjust projections more than quarterly because you get some noise in there. It's moderated a little bit at 4.4%. Meanwhile, the payroll tax has been flat through the first 3 quarters, which is a little contrary to the earnings tax, although they are a different base. The payroll tax, nonprofits do not pay the payroll tax, so you're looking at a different base. Although I also looked at the month of April for the payroll tax, and it has recovered a little bit, so you've seen a little bit of growth. Typically, they would move, the earnings tax and payroll tax would move in the same direction, although the growth on the payroll tax is less. And I think that's more because you'll notice that our employment base is more BJCs and SLUs and government offices and less on the for-profit sector.
On the original earnings tax, we just exempted the not-for-profits on that payroll tax when we implemented it.
I believe so, yes.
Right.
Right.
And so, just for everybody here, because that's a 0.5% payroll tax, so the company pays the 0.5%, except that not-for-profits, government agencies don't. But if you were to look at the overall number, and I don't have the overall number, but if the earnings tax is $152 million at 1%, and the payroll tax is a 0.5%, you'd think it'd be 75 million, but I think it comes in at about 34 million.
Right,
So my
right.
point is, we're leaving $40 million on the table because our largest employers are not making it, and there's a term out there that we may start addressing, but it's called pilots, payments in lieu of taxes, because those employers do utilize a tremendous amount of the services that we do. I know that their employees are paying the earnings tax, but they are utilizing our roads, our bridges, our fire department, our police department. You know, it's a conversation that we have to have. I just wanted to put that out there now, get you thinking about it. Alderman Moore.
Mr. Chairman, are we gonna ask questions as you go, or are you gonna wait?
If you got a question on one of these, ask.
I want to ask about the, back on page 2, if I can find it,
Okay.
about the airport decreasing and the water increasing. Is that a savings? Is that a reason why?
I think the airport is looking to reducing their costs simply because the more, over the last few years, the more they reduce their costs, the less it is that they have to charge for employments, which makes them more competitive. So that's something that they're always trying to do. Water division's actually up, although I know their employment is down. When it comes to the general fund and all, those are 2 enterprise funds, which don't really have that much of an impact on operating budget. But so they operate as separate enterprise funds. Now, we do get gross receipts tax payments from them based on revenues, but their operating costs don't affect very much the general fund operations.
They come out of enterprise fund?
That's right, enterprise fund sources.
Okay. Is there any particular reason why the water is up?
I'd have to look at it a little bit more closely in terms of where their increases were. Yeah, I'd have to look, I'd have to
Okay.
check.
All right, on the revenue side, Alderman Vaccaro.
Just a real quick question, Paul. You said the use tax is down, but what about we just passed that use tax should be.
Okay, I'll get to that a little bit, but
Okay.
let me tell you this. The new rate
Right.
will go into effect October 1st, because it's the first day of the second calendar quarter following the election.
Okay.
Then you will have a couple months' worth of lag time. So a retailer starts collecting it October, they remit it to the state in November, and then the state gives it to us in December. So it's probably, and there's a little leeway there, but typically there's a 2-month lag. So you're gonna get maybe 7 months' worth of revenues. That estimate's in here. And I can tell you two things. One is the economic development sales tax is in there, and it's been defined as the ordinance, and it's got line items in there, but that no more definition. You'll see it as a single page in the line. I can show you where that is if you need to.
So even with it in there, it's down?
Well, I'll get to that. Now, the use tax, the base is down. But in this budget, what we did basically at ENA, and if you remember that when the mayor came in and ENA said, oh, we'd like to see that freed up for other things, we did some additional cuts, and what we did was that basically had 2.3 million, which is the estimated impact of the increase, which is in effect in October, unaccounted for. I mean, so basically, it's not appropriated. So it's up, so the use tax budget is up, or the use tax revenues are up, but the budget is not, it's not appropriating that entire amount.
So that's what I thought, and that's what I thought I'd heard.
Yes.
So during this process, is that hands off, or can we use part of that if we're trying to plug gaps?
Well, that's,
That is up to ENA, okay,
No,
so.
ENA or us?
Well, I know that it's ENA, but the increases, we have to get approved by them. So that if I want to increase the recognition, I can spend it, but right now, it is off the table.
Okay, so
And
that's-
so you can just, it's $2.3 million. So you can just keep that in the back of your mind, but there's a lot of issues here for the city. And we didn't have that last year, and that's one of, and like I said, it isn't even gonna start till October. So just keep it in your mind, and we'll think of something to do with it. All right, Mr. Payne.
and finally on that, again, back to the bar charts on some of these revenues. The sales tax year-to-date was down 1.6%. Now, I was expecting it to be somewhat shy this year, given that we didn't have NFL football and all that, but it is down, is a decline, so it's actually less than what we had estimated. And that's where we're taking hits on not only the general revenue, but that takes a hit on the capital fund. The half-cent capital takes a hit on the public safety sales tax. There's a lot of special funds relying on sales tax, and because that's down, that's hitting us in a number of areas.
So it's less than you anticipated?
Yes, yes.
Down.
And
Okay, so
it's.
It's not as bad as you anticipated, yeah.
Well, it is, I did not anticipate much growth for the sales tax, but it's actually coming in under that. So that's one of the, while the earnings tax is outperforming, the payroll tax and sales tax are underperforming. So on page 4, this is an illustration. So when you hear, oh, the city's got a budget gap, what does that mean? Well, if you remember, we go through this exercise every year, and basically I'm projecting what the revenues will be, and then identifying what our expected increase in costs would be, to say, okay, if we're gonna fund everything, how much of a gap is there? And there's always a gap, but different years, different gaps. And for a non-recession year, we were starting out with around an estimate of about $20 million. It gets to be alarming when it's that high, particularly when you're still growing, you're still having revenue growth. I mean, for those who've been around for a while, you've seen recessions and it's been over 30 and all, but this isn't a recession, this is just a regular growth. So that's why I'm saying it was concerning seeing it that high. Now, we did get some benefits. We had the final health numbers weren't as bad, the health insurance numbers and the pension numbers weren't as bad, although they're still up. So I ended up with about a $17 million gap to start with. And I'll walk you through this real quickly. We start with the general revenue base of $511.1 million. FY actually 17 base, I should say 17, I see on that, was about 2.4. So if Right now, we're tracking about 2.4 under estimate, and we'll see how that fares by the end of the fiscal year. We got net growth at FY18 at 1.9%, and that includes some reallocation revenues there. And then we got the 27 pay reserve, which came out at 10.1. So that gives you a total base of about $508.1 million to start with. Now you look at the starting point for this year's budget was 511.1. You return to 26 paydays, so that takes 10.1 off. And then we've got a series of increases. For the police department, they've got their regular matrix increases. This isn't an across the board. This is just their normal step increases. Civilian pay increases, their health insurance, and pension. Now that $5.8 million, the biggest number there was pension. It went up it's going up $3.1 million next year. And pensions are still a concern for us. Fire, same thing. They get the matrix step increases and civilian pay increases, and plus their health insurance and pension was 1.5. And of that 1.5, pension was about $600,000. Now everyone else, that's the non-uniform pay increases, health insurance and pension was about 2.2. Our actual pension went down. ERS contribution went down this year about $500,000 in the general fund. Now lease debt obligations, the Carnahan Courthouse debt is up about $1 million. If you remember last year, we had some refinancings, which we're taking over 2 years, but the first year was greater than the second year, and next year it'll go up again, then it'll be flat after that, and that's how that was structured. So that was an increase of about $1 million. Justice Center lease, there's payments from the general fund to the capital fund paying for these things. And that's sort of our balancing act between how much you have in the capital fund and how much you have in the general fund. So if the capital fund revenues, one-time sources, go down, the general fund has to pick it up to pay for these things. And so by doing that, Justice Center lease would be up about $5.2 million. This assumes no reallocation, no one-time sources. This is what we'd have to increase the general fund contribution. And then again, the capital committee had talked about a new rolling stock lease, being that it needed to replace refuse trucks and such, and so that was going to be on our list. We did ultimately, and you'll see in the cut side, we didn't accommodate that, but that was on our list of increases. Workers' comp was up about $700,000. Personnel, we had an allocation for increase in fire and police testing. Again, that's going to be on the cut list. Public administrator, that became an appointed office for the first time beginning in January, but that was a half year, so its full year subsidy was $100,000. We do have one area of decrease you're going to see in the Board of Elections, because this year was this current fiscal year we had those scheduled elections. Next year there were no scheduled elections, and that's about a $1.4 million reduction. Our refuse waste disposal increases, they're currently exceeding budget by about $500,000, and so we had to budget for that.
Is that mostly overtime?
No, that's just the cost of the transfer station, the tonnage fee that we have to pay. So you'll see a line item in there for refuse transfer station, it's up by $500,000. Equipment services, fuel cost allocations, we basically look at the projections. This is a federal projection of what the oil prices are and all, and so it's been ticking up a little bit, and so we got about $200,000 increase in there. And then you've got these other things. Excess use tax, as I mentioned, was below the FY17 estimate, and looking like we'd have a negative balance. Same thing with the public safety sales tax, which is dragging below. And then the existing use tax reallocations that we don't assume going in. We end up there, but we don't assume it going in. That was $1.7 million on the public use tax, $1.7 million on the sales tax, and then $2.5 on the use tax. Well, if you add all that back in there, that gives you a base of 525.1, or about a gap of about $17 million. If you were funding everything, no reallocations, and trying to meet all your gap, that would be $17 million. So when you go forward, you say, well, how are we going to meet that gap? Because we have to have a balanced budget by July. And so the next page 5 sort of breaks it into 3 different categories. To bridge the gap, we added a series of budget cuts of about $7.3 million. Revenue reallocations of $6.4 million, and some new and special fund revenues of $3.3 million. Now the budget cuts include cuts across departments, net reduction of about 51 positions from the general and use tax funds. And then, as I mentioned, we didn't allow for the rolling stock equipment replacements. Some of the revenue reallocations, as you know, the half-cent sales tax, the awards are at 75% of normal allocation. That's about a $2.25 million reduction. And no new rec capital allocation of about $500,000. We're restoring the certificate of inspection fees, which was a fee that was increased and given to the lead fund, back to the general fund of about $1.35 million. And then the local use tax of housing at $315,000. That actually was a little less than what we were doing this year. We reallocated $500,000 last year. This is only $315,000. And the building demolition of about $2 million. And then in new and special fund revenues, there was an increase in EMS fees of about $1 million. An estimated increase from online sales. I've got a $1.15 million increase in that, and that was on the use tax. We're going to have to follow that because that's new, and it's one of those things we're going to have to be careful about.
Amazon's getting their money.
Yeah, and we're only beginning to see that, and it's going to be
I think it started in February.
right, and so it's going to be something we're going to have to watch closely during the year to make sure those are there. And then, of course, the Economic Development Tax, the capital fund, $1.1 million. That's that one piece of the that was allocated to capital.
Is there any projection on the reduction of 51 positions on attrition and possibly just, people leaving on their own? Or do we,
I don't know, that changes a bit, but you'll find that it's a combination of, it's mostly vacant, but there are filled positions as well. It's hard to get a number on because it changes every pay period, but I would say there's probably a dozen or more filled positions that have been eliminated in the budget. So you're going to be, probably when you talk to departments, you're going to be hearing departments that say, hey, I'm losing these vacant positions and these positions are filled, and it's going to be a combination.
okay.
Did you say that the LED program, the lead program was decreasing and going back into the general revenue fund?
In FY13, there was an increase in the certificate of inspection fee to go to the lead fund. Okay. But what they did was saying, okay, 60%, all this revenue used to go to general revenue.
Right.
Then it was reallocated to the lead fund. What's transpired since then, well, one, general revenue went down by about $500,000 in that year, and it's been down since. The lead fund, meanwhile, has just accumulated a balance of over $4 million at the end of last fiscal year. So what this is doing is returning that piece of the revenue back to the general revenue. So they would still have a significant balance in the fund itself, so it shouldn't impact their operations over there.
Okay.
On page 6, this is just a highlight again of some of the personnel costs. Anytime, it's funny, you ask about people and personnel. The reason why you do that when you're looking at a budget, because it's 75% of your budget. So almost any time you're
Right.
talking about reductions, it involves something related to personnel.
Yep.
And payroll costs, as I mentioned, 75% of the budget. You can see in the pie chart there. $5.8 million increase in the police department. That, again, incorporates the pay matrix increases of about $1 million. Civilian increase of about $400,000. Police retirement increase of $3.1 million. That was a big increase this coming year. Health insurance, 1.3. Their number of uniforms at 1316, that shows an increase of 24, but that's mostly in the recruit classes because they're running more recruits. And so that's what that reflects. We've also offset that with some declines in the about 8 vacant civilian positions. Fire department has some of the same increases that the police department would have in terms of pay matrix. And their overtime's about $1 million, or 100,000, and then non-uniform pay of 200,000. Their pensions were up 600,000, and health insurance is up 0.2 million. Their uniform strength also remains the same at 587. Non-uniform costs of $2.3 million. That includes this year's cost of the 1.5% merit increase. That, and for those who aren't familiar with it, the merit increase is based on anniversary date. So some may get it in the early part of the year, some may get it in the latter part of the year. So in a total fiscal year, you're probably looking at somewhat less than 1%. So we haven't been, in the last few years, we haven't been budgeting an increase in the year in which it occurs, because most departments can make that fit just through attrition and all. But once that year is complete, then we say, okay, we're budgeting the new cost of everyone's increase that is up about 1.5%. And as I mentioned, ERS costs were down about $400,000 in the general fund. Moving to page 7, this is highlighting by department some of the cuts that we've made across the departments. In the general government and finance departments, Board of Aldermen, we cut that one vacant position you've had. Mayor's office was up $300K plus a position. The city councilor was cut 2 positions. The comptroller was down in that 3 positions. And then remember that one of the increases, the fire and police promotional testing, decided to defer that and use existing lists that they have not expired. Citywide accounts, as I mentioned, no additional capital funds for rolling stock fleet replacements. Other capital cuts to reduce the general fund subsidy. The assessor subsidy is down by $390,000, and we've also reduced 2 positions in the assessor. Unemployment comp was down. That more reflects actual spending there. In the Parks Department, if you remember last year, we had an additional, we increased it for some contractual weed cutting. That has been cut out this year's budget. Parks Division cuts 3 vacant positions. I know that's one of those ones which always, you always want to add to, and that's gonna, yeah.
Hear the phone ringing already.
I can tell you this year, you're gonna see a number of those that come up, and that's what this process is
Are
about.
those full-time positions?
Well, those are not, in forestry, that was the contract, if you remember. I think they wanted the contract, so that was what was cut.
Okay.
And those positions, I think those are, yes, those are full-time positions.
Were those vacant or they laid?
These ones, I think, were vacant.
Okay.
And again, like I said, some of them you're gonna see that are vacant, some of them aren't. So it's gonna vary by department.
Right, and the problem is they would be vacant and there's no hurry to fill them in the winter.
Okay.
So I just,
So that just left on there.
okay, but springtime, the grass grows.
Right. Right.
Judicial offices, the circuit courts were down net 2 positions. The circuit attorney was 1 position, but they had some pay increases there which were offset. The sheriff is down 3 positions, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from the sheriff as well. The salary savings used, inserted a salary savings to offset their pay. They were requesting a bunch of pay increases. In looking at the budget, I'm trying to keep everyone within the same 1.5% confine. And so even though the desire was to increase pay, well, that's okay, but then something else has to give.
Right.
So I put a big salary savings there, and that's what and I met with him, and I said, look, I'm trying to keep you guys within the 1.5, and I would recommend that that's sort of, that when other departments, particularly other offices, think they can get pay raises higher, well, that's fine, but then you have to make a decision to try to keep your payroll within the same.
So these court offices did that in every case. They eliminated positions so they get paid more than what we're gonna give as the pay raise the city.
The courts reduced the number of positions that they were recommending for the sheriff's office, yeah.
And what is the pay raise, just the general pay raise for city employees?
General pay raise is a 1.5% merit anniversary, based on the anniversary. So it may be scattered throughout the year. It depends on what your anniversary. Yeah. Medical examiner is up about 50,000. That is based on their contract that they have there, although they will say that's not enough. The recorder, again, cut 1 position. That was also to offset increases in that budget. The street division, you'll see a traffic LED lease offset with utility savings. This is that conversion. There's a, they entered into a loan with the street department or the Department of DNR to,
We're on page 8 now.
yes, the top of page 8. To convert street lights, traffic lights to LED that actually is paid for with utility savings, so it was not an impact here,
Right.
but you'll see that line in their budget. It's down, but the traffic division itself is down position as well as some supply reductions. Street division has cut utility workers, 5 utility workers. Refuse is down about 7 vacant positions. Towing director's office have some miscellaneous cuts. And one of the last proposals was for school crossing guards to be funded through public schools. That was another one of the reductions, and that was one of the things that we've been, I think they're working on that.
Be able
Did they
to
accept
now.
that?
I think they're coming up with an agreement on that,
Oh,
but that
good.
was the proposal.
Good.
Public safety, the building division's cut 5 positions, and miscellaneous cuts about $280,000. Neighborhood stabilization's cut 3 positions, about $200,000. Corrections, medical, and food contract, you'll see an increase, but one of the things that I noticed with corrections is that they've got a lot of vacant positions, so I took some salary savings to offset some of the increases in the medical and food contracts. Excise salaries, those were down about 30,000. And then those vacant park ranger positions, those were added either last year or the year before,
before.
but they've been vacant ever since, and so those have been eliminated.
So we never,
Didn't mean that.
They were never filled.
they were never,
Uh,
I think so, yeah.
And then there was an attorney added to the police department for some of their work there, and then one vacant marshal position was also cut from police.
Where did the attorney go, to the police
The
department?
police department, I think that was mostly to address some of the informational type, they get a lot of these,
Requests for
yeah, sunshine, and
information.
they said, well, it needs to be sort of,
Yeah.
there has to be information extracted, it was sort of really technical and so.
Okay.
You have Dave's budget in there?
What's that?
You have Dave Sweeney's budget
We'll
in there?
get to that. Question,
Yes.
so the police department has basically a general counsel now?
No, there was a request in this coming year's budget they've been saying that they're getting a lot of informational type requests where you say, hey, it's either a sunshine or something like that. And so they provide this, but there are certain things where someone has to
be
review it
excluded.
and say, this is confidential, the particular information, which can't be included in general information, that they have to review before it's released. And they've been falling behind on that. And they're saying, well, then what do you need in order to be able to be more responsive to these requests? Well, we need an attorney position to review that. So that's sort of how it came about.
Is this a
Right.
contractual person?
No, this would be an employee. It would be in the.
And I pray this is not the salary.
Is that the salary of
Where's that?
One
One forty-three?
No.
That's just,
Okay.
There's some other
Okay.
things in there. But you'll see it, you'll
That's
see,
what I was wondering, I'm like,
no, you'll see in the personnel schedule, you'll
We'll
see
see
it.
it.
You'll
Okay.
see it.
Does the Department of Public Safety not have a person that can do that?
I
mean, we got all the.
Yeah,
city
I don't
attorneys,
think
and
that
it seems
particular
like
position,
the city
there was some,
Howard,
yeah,
This Alderman
I'm
asked the
sorry.
question, and the budget
Sorry.
director will answer it. Thank you.
they specifically requested an attorney simply because of the nature of the work. And that's where and the public director doesn't have that. So,
So we can take that up with the police department.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Department of Health and Hospitals, or Health and Human Services, the Health Department is down net 14 positions. They included one of the big changes with them is their contract with Animal Control, which is going to be, they're contracting with the Stray Rescue, for operations of the Animal Control Center. The Board of Public Service, one decrease we found here was utility accounts, which have been underspent this year about $1 million, so that has been reduced. There was a deputy position in which we removed the funding for, and then some increases related to the garage consolidation. So that's the $7.3 million in budget cuts. And then moving to page 9, there were some additional revenues, EMS fees, which I mentioned earlier, pending rate adjustments of about $1 million. Excess use tax, again, that's based on the online sales. We're going to have to keep an eye on that one, since it's so new, to make sure we meet that number. And then the economic development infrastructure, that was just the portion allocated to capital. The rest of them, as I mentioned, aren't allocated at all, and so, other than that particular line item budget. So that's about $3.3 million. And then we have the fund reallocations I mentioned earlier. The ward capital, this year was at 85%, next year would be at 75%, and no new recreation allocation, that's about $500,000. So in total, that's $2.75 million. The lead fund, the certificate of inspection fees, it's $1.35 million. And then the local use tax, again, that's $315,000 from the Affordable Housing Fund. It used to be $500,000, so that was a little better that way. And then $2 million in building demo funds. That's $6.4 million in total fund reallocations. Moving to page 10, this is an illustration of revenues for the general fund. And starting with the earnings tax, the estimate of $179.1 million. It's a 2.7% increase over the current fiscal year, or the revised estimate of the current fiscal year. As I mentioned, it's the one tax that seems to be outperforming all the others. Bless you.
One you
Bless
wanna
you.
get rid of.
And 3 to 5 year growth rate on the earnings tax is between 3.2 and 3.3%. So it's one of the ones that has been reliable. Property tax, we expect, I've got it at $60 million, is a 1.5% increase. Now, we had been, up to this year, it was a concern in that we, because of declines in previous valuation years, we had maxed out on our rate. But as the assessor released yesterday, the valuations are going up now. And now that shouldn't, reassessment values don't impact revenue because you have to reduce the rate accordingly.
Right.
But what it does do is it brings you below that cap, because there's going to be a rollback later in the year. So in years in which you don't grow, you're allowed to capture inflation and all, so that gives you a little bit more breathing room. So that's actually a good thing to see property values rise again.
Yeah.
Sales taxes, after, as I mentioned, I'm expecting a decrease this year. I've got a slight increase of 1% next year. That would be still a little less than trend. We had seen some growth in the sales tax on a 3 to 5 year basis of about 3%. But the long-term growth rate is still just a little over 1.5, something like that. So I've got it at 1% next year. Again, we'll keep monitoring that. The payroll tax, I've got it at 1.5%. Again, I've got growth in there, although it's, as I mentioned, it trails the earnings tax growth. Franchise utility tax receipts are actually one of the areas where we're falling short this year. Got a 2.7% increase next year. One of the biggest components of that is electric gross receipts. UE just recently had a rate increase, and it should be an average of about 3.5%. Also, projections on natural gas costs are up about 3% over the next 12 months, and so that generates the increase in that category. I don't expect much in the intergovernmental fees and licenses, which are more fixed rate fees, so no increases there. That's $28.2 million and $13.6 million respectively. Departmental fees and fines at $53 million. That's a 6.9% increase. That includes the EMS billing, about $1.8 million. Some increase in the billing fees, and then that certificate of issuance fee, certificate inspection fee is in that category. So that's why that amount is so high. And the other category at $33 million, that's the biggest change there is because that's where the 27th pay, that was a draw from the 27th pay reserve, so we won't be doing that next year. Also, in that category, it's sort of a franchise receipt. But one thing that's troubling in one of our sources of revenue, telecom gross receipts. We have a 7.5% gross receipts tax on telecom. That's both landlines as well as cell phones. As you know, most people are getting rid of landlines, and that's been eating away at that. And then cell phones, both with the switch to the internet as well as the competition among it, the cost has been going down. So our revenue has been going down, and that's one that we've seen over the last few years have gone down significantly, 16% over the last 2 years.
And that's in the other category?
That's in the other. Sometimes when I discuss franchise tax, I have it discussed in the franchise tax category, but the ordinance specifically has telecom receipts coming through the pension trust fund into the general fund, so that's why it's in that other category. It's a transfer. And at $510.5 million, that's about a 2.2% increase after adjusting for the 27th pay. And the pie chart below, you'll see earnings tax is about 35% of the general fund revenue. On page 11, this is just an illustration of the general fund expenditures. I've already gone through most of these things. Again, I'll just, some of the highlights. The non-departmental, that 4.2% increase, that's the debt services went up $2 million, assessor is down. The 15% decline in county offices, mostly due to the election board, given that there's no citywide elections next year. Board of Public Service is down 3.3% because of the utilities, about $1 million decline. The big thing here is if you look at the pie chart down below, public safety is about 57% of the general fund budget.
And most of that is police.
Biggest department of that would be police, yes. Next page, which would be page 12, some of the changes in the special funds. I discussed the local use tax a bit. It's down 5.1% year to date, and it was tracking at 28.1 million, which is 1.4 million under estimates. So as I mentioned, with our projected gap, starting with our gap, we're looking at trying to overcome the beginning balance, which would have been negative. Now, the FY '18 estimate is $31.4 million. That includes the 7 months of a new rate of the economic development sales tax, $2.25 million, that is to be appropriated. So that is not including that $2.25 million that has not been appropriated in this budget yet. As I mentioned, there is the reduced reallocation of $315,000 affordable housing funds, although that total budget is still $5 million because they're using an existing fund balance. Building demo remains at the reduced allocation of $1 million. As I mentioned, the big change in health department is their budget is $7 million and includes the contract with Spray Rescue. You'll find that there's a new fund called the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, and it's the new half-cent sales tax which goes into effect in October. We're expecting 7 months of receipts in FY '18, about $11.3 million allocated for ordinance as follows. And so if you look at that sheet for the Economic Development Sales Tax, you'll see these 5 line items with these dollar amounts. So it hasn't been defined as much yet. I assume that will come. The lead and building demo funds, as I mentioned, the certificate of inspection fees have been moved to the general fund. Current fund currently has a balance of over $4 million. Building demo fund is currently in a negative balance of a little less than $2 million, and we're allocating $500,000 from the use tax demo fund to stop those deficits. The gaming fund, that's another source of revenue, has been declining in recent years, and it continues to decline. It was down 4.5% through the third quarter of the current fiscal year. The FY '18 budget is $6.3 million, is down $800,000. If you look about 10 years ago, it was double that revenue.
Is it because people aren't gambling, or is it a tax that is?
No, the
Great.
tax is flat, but a couple things have occurred. One, the county
Yeah.
facility opened up, that
Right.
drained off a lot. We did have that $1 million in payment from Pinnacle that was then allocated to economic development. So there were a number of things that occurred over that interim to drop it. And then there's just fewer use of that. So that's just another one of those things. You identify certain sources that are declining, and it's hard to overcome that with growth in your other revenues. The C&T fund I always put on there, that's basically the restaurant tax, which actually is about flat this year, and it's got a small allocation for both Sister Cities and Grand Center. Those are retained in this year's budget. On page 13, a discussion of the capital fund. It's $39.9 million. It's a decrease of $2.4 million. Board capital is at 75% of the full allocation, and no additional recreation capital funds. And you can see in the pie chart how it's allocated. The existing citywide debt of $21.1 million. That includes the debt service on the Carnahan Courthouse, the Juvenile Detention Center, the Justice Center. All of our debt service items, including rolling stock, are $21.1 million. Other citywide capital of $1.8 million. The courts had $800,000 for repairs, about like elevators and asbestos and things like that. And then some smaller other items, particularly the $350,000 for BPS for miscellaneous building repairs. And then also includes $500,000 for the ash tree removals, the forestry tree program. This will be the second year of that program. We're expecting it to be a 5-year deal. So that's progressing as well. Ward improvements of $6.4 million. That's 75% of normal. One of the big differences you're going to, aside from the reallocation, is the fact that last year, if you remember, we had a surplus in the sales tax. So you started with $500,000 plus your allocation. This year, sales taxes are falling short, so we're $400,000 in the hole. So just that by itself is a $900,000 swing. So that's one of the reasons why you see as much as a decrease, as well as the increase in the reallocation amount. Major neighborhood parks, $7.5 million, of which about $3.1 million, that is debt service. And police department at $1.8 million, and that's all debt service. Starting on page 14, this is a summary of changes in the personnel totals by fund. The general fund at 5,009 positions is down 37 positions. And again, these cuts are across most departments. General government's down 2, finance down 2.8, parks is down 4, Judicial's down almost 8, streets is down about 15, et cetera. So you'll see declines in most departments there. Special funds are down 8 positions, health department's down 14, air pollution. There is a air pollution function that they proposed to assume in-house, but it is in a special fund in the health department. That's 2 positions, that's an increase. Grant funds are down 18, again, a lot of those related to the human services and health grants, which are down about 11, and some police grants which are down 6. And enterprise are actually up 10 positions. Water is up 4 and airport is up 6. And as you can look by the bar chart down below, public safety is the largest of the categories, with 3,350 positions.
Paul, the general fund, 37, I know you've gone over each one. Can we get a chart to show those 37 positions?
Sure, I'm thinking, if it's by fund,
Yeah, it should be.
we have a personnel chart in the back of the big, thick book. But actually, I'll do that by fund as well. But we do have a 3-year history in the back, in the back of this big book. But I'll get you a simpler one as well.
If you, Sarah, if you would, have your secretary email me what you want, and Paul, if you can get it for the whole committee. I'd
Sure,
appreciate it.
and I'll just email it down.
That'll be fine.
Sure,
Just get it to, I guess, send it to Steve or myself, and
Sure.
I'll get it to everybody.
do that. On page 15 is a historical perspective of the change. This gives you a 10-year history. And you can see that the general fund is down from FY08 to FY18, 332 positions. Special funds categories are down 72. Grant funds are down 62. Enterprise are down 138. So we're down over 600 positions in the last 10 years. On page 16, I include a discussion of pension costs since it has such an impact on our operating budget. After peaking in FY14, we had some declines. Obviously, we did the fire pension reform, which reduced our costs a bit. But now, the second year in a row, we're going to see a slight increase in pension costs of about $2.3 million. It's just under $85 million. Police pensions are going up about $3.1 million. Fire is going up $600,000. ERS, all funds, are down about $1.4 million. On 17 gives you a snapshot of the status of each of those funds. There's actually 4 pension funds. Employee retirement system has a market value of $765 million with liabilities is $974. It's about 81.9% funded.
What's the requirement?
Most actuaries would say that if you're around 80%
You're
or
okay.
higher, you're okay.
That's right.
It requires you to be 80% at least if you're going to consider any sort of increases and such.
Right.
But the thing you also look at is what the market basis is, because we use a smoothing value. So let's look at the ERS system. So if you have a big loss, that loss is smoothed over 5 years. Similarly, if you have a big gain, it's smoothed over 5 years. So if you look at the actuary basis, 82%, and then you look at the market basis, 78%, that means there's some losses yet to be recognized in the valuation. It's still pretty narrow,
Yeah.
but it's hovering around 80%.
Okay.
So the issue there might not be as much as the funded status as the cost of maintaining it.
Right.
Fire retirement system, the old FRS system is 92.4% funded. We are still contributing to that system. And the new FRP at 42% funded, that would seem low, but it's only 4 years old. So if you remember, last year it was in the 30s, and it's going to keep going up because as it matures. The police retirement system is funded at 78%, 74% on a market basis. And I mentioned that the increase, that the total cost of $84.7 million across all the systems, with the biggest increase being the police, was $3.1 million.
These are all managed separately, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. In fact, just as a sort of a primer, employee retirement system is governed by the city ordinance. Fire retirement, the old FRS system is now frozen, and we passed the FRP system by ordinance. But police retirement is all state statute, so there is no city ordinance. It's just what they do in the state level.
should have took that too.
So, finally, on page 18 is sort of, page 18, just a summary. As I mentioned, the total budget of $1,051.4 million. That's a 1% increase in the previous fiscal year. General fund budget of $510.5 million. That's down 0.1%, or 1.9% increase after adjusting for the 27th pay, with a net decrease of 37 general fund positions and 53 positions from all funds. It bridges the budget gap with a combination of budget cuts and fund reallocations, but it leaves $2.3 million in the use tax funds yet to be appropriated. And then, as I mentioned to E&A, this balance scenario is not ideal, but it provides the framework, but additional revenues and cuts, changes, efficiencies will be needed to restore or increase priority areas and obviously, ultimately achieve a structural balance. Obviously, we still have some continued longer-term challenges. This is the 9th year of economic expansion. So what that tells you is that, A, we're still doing okay, but we're counting our blessings that we're not back in a recession, which will come eventually, and those are the kind of things we have to be prepared for. Restoring reserves, this is the one thing the rating agencies continue to harp on in terms of our reserve and fund balance. We try to do that each year,
We've got to get that in.
but we still have to address that. Continuing pension reforms, as I mentioned, because that's one of the increases that we continue to see, and we will continue to see as the years continue. And the financing of our capital needs, which we are woefully underfunded on. And so that's pretty much the summary, and I'll take any more questions you might have.
If anybody has questions, we can go in order. Marlene, you'd be first, so we'll just go down the line if we have questions, and if not, Paul, you know what I need sent over.
Yes.
So, Marlene,
Okay, well, I'll probably combine questions with statements.
Okay.
But I know you can keep up.
Okay.
Okay. So I made my notes as I was going through here. And just to give you an understanding of where I'm at sitting at this table this year, I'm very, very much concerned about the city budget and our future. It's time to make the hard decisions that should have been made 3 to 5 years ago. So that's where I'm coming from. I still think that we own too many facilities that we can't afford to own, and I'd like to look at all of them and determine where we are. Most cities, urban areas cannot afford the debt that they put themselves in now. And so we have to be smart business people and get ourselves out of it. And so I'm just gonna go page by page with everything very quickly to just kind of give you an idea, and I know we'll get down to the brass tacks later on. Public administrative position, I have no use for that as a city government. That's something that should be eliminated, and you outsource those services as needed. The Board of Elections needs to be reorganized and put into more of a computerized system and have a more efficient operation.
You said Board of Elections.
Board of Elections. And I know, I've got details on all of this. So I'll just keep going through this because I don't understand why we don't know that we are in trouble. And so I want to go there. My budget cuts. I had expected to see a minimum of $10 million cut. If I had my way, it'd be 15. And I could do it without a heartbeat and in a short period of time. But we need to try to strive to get to at least 10 million in cuts. We also have, when I look at the 10% share of economic development taxes going to the capital fund, why is it so low? Is it something that says we can't go any higher?
That was the amount specified by the ordinance.
So we need to look at that. We really need to look at that, because that should be somewhere between 15 to 20 minimum. It doesn't make sense for us to make these incentives available if we're not going to benefit from them in a more progressive way. So we may need to look at redoing that. When we look at parks, recreation, and forestry, we got 3 positions cut here, but we got to look at how to provide services better. for us to be here in almost 2018, and we're worried about cutting lots all summer, that's no common sense anymore. We need to kill the grass on these vacant lots that we own. We need to sod them with renewable annuals that blossom and bloom. It helps beautify the city. It cuts out all that expense from cutting that grass every week. Most urban areas have already done that process as long as 5 years ago. So we might as well get into it and get it done.
Put in a grass that only
Well,
gets so hot.
so.
Well, yeah,
But
yeah.
when Parks comes in,
No, no, no,
you know, well, I know, I'm trying to keep.
I'm almost done. I'm almost done. But he has to hear what I'm saying. I'm almost done. So so we'll just keep looking at all these things, because I'm gonna bring them up when all those departments come in here. But this is the man who understands the money,
I understand that.
okay?
And we're going leeway
All
because
right.
the president's cutting out on us, so.
Oh, no,
Did you
we're
need to
not-
speak? I
We're
didn't stop.
we're rescheduling.
No, we're good. We're
Oh,
We're
good.
gonna
okay.
reschedule, so we got a little extra time.
Because
Okay.
all of the changes we made yesterday in personnel, we need to adjust things to get all this stuff ready before. we
Okay.
So
decide.
this is all we're gonna hear today, so we got time. We got time. We'll just-
So Louis paying us.
Well, let her go.
Yeah.
Carol, did you have a question?
No.
Oh.
Can I have a copy?
Yeah, I'll give it to you. So, on the fund reallocations, FY 18, our proposals that you have here are, with it being down for the ward allocations, I wanna look at how we can go and look at that and, probably bring it back up with some additional changes. Just kind of flip the script a little bit in that category, because we do need to make sure that these wards are taken care of properly. And there's another way to do it. And people are not gonna be happy about what I say later on recreation. We talked about selling the buildings, we talked about that. And when we talk about these pension costs and employment status, we need to offer some early out for some staff. We gotta cut this down. We need to cut at least another 500 positions. And there's no reason why we can't. We got a lot of fluff. We need to also automate some additional things. And so I could look at that budget and see that already. And people just don't wanna make the hard decisions. We make sure people have health care coverage, they'll be fine. There are a lot of people who wanna retire, but they don't feel like they can afford to, but we'll help them. And then for the valuations and stuff, when you talked about the police and all that, I wanna go back and look at that state statute and see what we can do about getting control of that pension fund, because we need to do some things different. And at the end here, I wanted to look at we talked about the positions, we got that, and I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree with you on that, Peter Ward Capital, and I think as a group, we need to look at
Oh, we can figure
where
it out.
we can find money to put back, because that, when it comes down to it, we're the ones that get shelled at, because the alley's not patched up and everything.
Question?
Yeah, so Carol, you're,
I'm next.
yeah, you're up.
I guess what I would be wondering, we do have a lot of buildings, and we have a lot of buildings that are in disrepair. Has there ever been an audit on how much building we use versus what personnel we have? Are we, do we have a lot of space floating around that's needing to be maintained, but not being used?
I'm not aware of any recent audits of space. I do know that when the city has the opportunity, for instance, that building across the way there, they're saying, where can we?
Has that sold?
I think that's underway, or there's there is some project that's planned for that, and that is on the way. I can't speak to the other ones. For instance, when you look at the Carnahan Courthouse, that's a pretty large building. Now, are all of that's being used efficiently, and what the alternative would be, I don't know if I can address
And then
that.
we look at 1520.
1520, that's right.
That's another holding. I mean, these are just holdings that we
Right.
have right here that we can touch.
Right.
But, throughout the city, we have a lot of property that, even LCRA property that we're holding on to, and it could be put back up in line and collect taxes on it rather than us holding it. So it's just a thought, and I don't know what it would cost to get this audit going. So, but that's another idea. The other thing is in work capital, I shudder to say that is it all being used and is it all being allocated on an annual basis and earmarked? Are there some people holding on to work capital? I sometimes wonder if you're not using it, shouldn't there be an expiration date on those
Oh,
funds?
absolutely.
You know, I mean, if you haven't identified what you're gonna do with it or
Can you send us
earmarked
a
it.
breakdown of ward by
Okay.
ward?
Actually,
What
what,
each ward's sitting on?
it's funny you mention that. There were certain reports that, I don't know if it would be used, I didn't want to bunch it, but I can put this online if you'd like. I mean,
I don't-
Well, not just yet.
Not just
no,
yet.
no,
Not just
But
yet.
do me a
Not just
favor,
yet.
get a copy for everybody on the committee and get it to Conway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Okay,
like a
I'll
copy.
send you all, the this is as of May 1st. And I
That's
can just send
on
it,
what-
yes,
what
and it has to
it's
balance
on.
it for everybody, and I'll just send it down to
And
you.
one more thing, people, I mean, some of the departments that have employees, positions that have not been filled for years and years and years. Again, shouldn't there be an expiration date on that, on when, if you don't use it, you lose it?
I think what you're seeing in this year's budget is a lot of cutting out of that kind of stuff.
Okay,
Um,
okay. Cause I just find that, you know, when we
Right.
can't hire public safety officials and we can't buy trash trucks and we're going out and asking our citizenry for more money, it seems we look like poor managers. And I'm done.
Thank you. And Paul, yeah, before you go, I wouldn't mind getting copies of that, and then we all have them.
Sure.
And then, sorry, thank you. Alderwoman Murphy,
No questions at this time.
okay, then Alderwoman Boyd.
Digesting what everybody said.
Okay, so Alderman Muhammad, any questions for Paul?
Well, I pretty much missed half of it. I was in another committee hearing, so I'm gonna bug you later to figure out
Okay,
exactly
so,
what was going on.
Yeah.
Paul, thank you so much for coming in. If you can get us the stuff we asked, I wouldn't mind getting a copy of that.
You want me to send it to you email?
Yeah, yeah, if you could get it to me.
Okay.
I can have a copy.
I'll send it to you in email,
You
that
want
way
this
you can,
back right
that
now?
way you
Okay.
can circulate it
Yeah,
by
but
email.
I definitely want a
If we
copy.
could, I'd like to see.
Very
Sure.
interesting.
That one
Sure.
was really on my mind.
Okay.
Why
If
you
you could
get
do that
more?
today, it would be nice.
Sure, absolutely.
Other than that, the
You want a reserve.
the Board of Aldermen is getting moved to a different day, so we're done for the day. Paul, thank you for your time. If there's no other questions,
Thank you, sir.
then the meeting's adjourned.